This is the Nikon Zf, and we've had this little baby for 9 months, and we're finally doing our review. It's got the retro cool styling of a film camera with all the modern features that you would want.
It's good for stills or video, and it's a great way to have fun taking pictures, to look good while you do it, to celebrate the history and fashion of photography. But there are some better options, and there are some catches. Like, this is $2,000 unless you get the color, and you definitely want a color, and then it's $2,100, and then the lens was extra. But if you want to save some money, KEH currently has 7 of these for sale used, and you can get the lens used. So use our link to visit our sponsor, KEH. They have the world's largest supply of used cameras and lenses, and you can get this exact gear for quite a bit of savings, especially if you use the coupon code that you find in our description. That can get you 5% off. So thanks for sponsoring us, KEH. And by the way, they give you a 180-day warranty. They give you a return period, so you get all the benefits of buying new at a lower price. The Zf has good specs, but they're not going to blow you away. It's just a well-rounded camera. It has a full-frame sensor here, which is more than twice the size of the ZF-C with its APS-C sensor. And that means it's going to get better low-light performance and overall produce more bokeh. This is a 24 megapixel sensor, which is pretty standard. That's a good amount. And for social media and even good-sized prints, that's more than enough. The sensor here, I should say, it's stabilized, and that means in low light conditions you'll be able to shoot at lower ISOs, you'll be able to get cleaner images, you'll be able to use longer exposures handheld without having to use a tripod. And I found that worked really well. It's a good solid stabilization system that should let you shoot 3 stops below the reciprocal rule in our testing. For action, when you want to shoot a high frames per second, the stills will do 14 frames per second with the mechanical shutter, with essentially no rolling shutter. Or if you can tolerate just a little rolling shutter, it's not bad, then it will go up to 30 frames per second with the ability to shoot silently. The video specs are decent. Again, they're not going to blow you away. It does full width 4K at 30 frames per second, pretty standard. It'll do 4K 60, but it'll crop in 1.5 times. So at 4K 60, it's basically back to being an APS-C camera, and that means it doesn't match all of its competitors. Nikon managed to fit 2 card slots in here, which means if you have a memory card failure, you can have a backup. But this is, I've never seen this before, but it has 1 SD card and 1 micro SD card like you would use in a drone. And well, that's okay, because you'll probably never have to take that micro SD card out. But if you did want to pull it out, you have to first remove the battery in order to remove the micro SD card. But for me, I just put that in there, and I'll probably just leave it in there forever as a backup, and I'll work with the SD card.
I want to talk about the handling and the styling of this camera, because the handling is pretty fun. They really did try to give us a film-like experience. You can see that the dials on the top can control the shutter speed and your ISO, and you get that feeling like you're controlling things like an old film camera. But you're also able to go into this PSAM mode and still have aperture priority and shutter priority right at the top. You have a fully articulating flip screen, so you're able to film yourself or take pictures of yourself, and so you're getting that tactile experience while also having these modern features. One thing that I want to complain about is right here. Do you see this aperture ring? I love my aperture ring. This one is fake. It's a phony. It's a fraud. It looks very cool that it's silver, but it doesn't do anything, and my hand kind of naturally goes there.
This is the modern Nikon lens, and this is the vintage lens. The grip matches up pretty good, but this dial on the modern lens is completely fake, whereas on the vintage lens, you use this to adjust the aperture.
The styling of this camera is also beautiful. It does look like a film camera. I know some people don't really get the appeal, but I like that it's beautiful, it's more compact. And I will say that it's not just about the experience of me enjoying how the camera looks, it's how people treat me when I'm using a camera that looks more fun and artistic rather than professional and maybe a little boring. And for an example, when I go out in my own town and I bring a camera like this, people will say, oh, I took photography classes, or oh, my dad had a film camera like that. Whereas if I bring my bigger mirrorless camera, like my Sony A1, people will say, where are you coming in from? What are you visiting in town? Are you having a nice trip? So I don't really look like a tourist when I'm shooting with this, but also it can impact the people I'm taking pictures of, because I feel like my big professional camera makes people kind of clam up and feel serious and do a serious pose, where this just seems more approachable, casual. People in the street don't feel like they're having their privacy invaded. They feel like maybe I'm a little artsy. I want to talk about the colors though. There is a wide range of colors available. And sorry, Tony, I feel like you chose the wrong one. It kind of looks like a Wilson basketball. It's very orange. There's this little strange strip at the top. I mean, it's fine. It's not a deal breaker for me, but I think I would have gone with the green. Probably the green. I'm a green girly.
Right now, the king of retro cameras is definitely the Fuji X100VI. In fact, you can't even buy this. They're like basically sold out. But it has a lot of advantages over Nikon. Like, I can see Nikon's going for Fuji's vibe because Fuji's selling like crazy, but I don't think they really figured it out. Part of it is the controls. Nikon gives you a manual analog control for the ISO and the shutter speed, just like Fuji does. But Fuji, they have a little A here, and that little A means automatic. So if you want to control the shutter speed, you just dial the shutter speed in. And if you don't want to deal with it, if you want the camera to figure it out, you set it to A. There's no decision to be made there. Same thing for the ISO. And the aperture is on a ring right on the lens. That applies for just about all the Fuji cameras. On the Nikon, there's more of a process. There's more unfun decisions to be made. If you have a manually dialed in ISO and you want it to be automatic, you have to actually go into the menus to do that. You have to look at a screen. It's no longer an analog experience.
To switch from automatic to manual ISO on any of the retro Fuji cameras, you simply grab the ISO dial and adjust it. The Nikon Zf and ZFC have an ISO dial, but if you're in auto ISO mode, doing this does nothing. You have to press the menu button, go to the camera, scroll down to ISO sensitivity settings. Turn off auto sensitivity control. Only now can you adjust the ISO.
If you have automatic shutter and you decide you need to be at 1/2000th to freeze the action, and you turn the dial here, the camera doesn't necessarily listen. It might completely ignore your input unless you're in shutter priority or manual mode. So when I'm using this in the real world, I've dialed in a shutter speed only to realize I was in the wrong mode.
Imagine you're shooting an event and you realize you need a shutter speed of 1/250th to cancel motion blur. On any of the Fuji retro-styled cameras, you simply grab the shutter speed dial and set it to 1/250th. You don't need to consider any other factors. On the Nikon ZF and ZFC, you first have to ask yourself, do I also want to control the aperture? And if you do, then you'll shift into manual mode. And if you don't want to control the aperture, then instead you'll shift into shutter priority mode. Only then will adjusting the shutter speed have any effect.
The PASM dial is completely unnecessary, as Fuji shows. My other rant is that Fuji has a ton of retro-styled lenses for their interchangeable lens cameras, like the X-T4, the X-T5, the X Pro 3. Nikon has 2 retro-styled lenses. 2. You can get a 28mm f2.8 or a 40mm f2.
This is the Nikon ZF with one of its retro lenses. Everything looks natural and cohesive. But if you remove this lens over here and put on a modern lens, it works just fine, but looks a little less cohesive.
Fortunately, you can use the Nikon FTZ adapter to mount vintage lenses to the ZF.
I spent some time shooting portraits of Chelsea with my vintage 105 f2.5 lens, and I found it worked great. The viewfinder was sharp enough to help me nail the manual focus, and the images turned out perfect. This camera is perfectly suited for adapting vintage lenses.
If you like the retro styling and you want interchangeable lenses, Fuji has some really great options for you.
I really like the Fujifilm X-T5 because it also has a flip screen, so it has the versatility of that. But if you don't want a flip screen, you can get an X-T5. Or if you'd rather have a rangefinder styling and a little more minimalist approach, use the X Pro 3, which was my main fun retro camera for years. KEH has all of those at deep discounts, significantly less expensive than this. The Fuji system is APS-C, but their lenses are faster, and depending on the lens you get, that can more than make up for it. So those Fuji APS-C cameras can outperform this in low light. They can give you more background blur, and getting them used at KEH, it'll end up being much less expensive.
If you want a ton of options with great prices, be sure to check out our sponsor, KEH, and use our link if you want to support us. You can get 5% off when you shop with them. So thanks, KEH. The autofocus system generally works really well, especially if there's nice bright lighting. But I noticed when the light gets lower, the autofocus starts to fall apart. And my daughter and I were both taking pictures. I was taking pictures, she was taking video. And once the light got low, it started using a green assist light. And she was a little bit annoyed by that because it was ruining her video. I turned off the green assist light and then it wasn't autofocusing in low light. So that was a bit of an issue. But generally it's okay, and it has eye detection autofocus, which works pretty well. It's going to find your subject relatively well, but we're going to kind of push it to its limit, and I'm going to make Tony run around a little bit and see how it performs with a bit of movement and action. I put a 70 to 200 lens on here, so that's an option, and it's full frame, of course. And then I put it on 30 frames per second, but full disclosure, if you do that, you have to shoot JPEG, and also you have to make sure that HDR is off. So there are some settings that you have to change. Another thing to note is if you're using a larger, heavier lens, you no longer have that big chunky grip that you may be accustomed to. So it's very difficult to do one-hand shooting. It's hard to get that balance. So I am primarily holding onto the lens and then trying to strategically press the buttons. If this is a typical setup for you, you might appreciate a camera with a beefier grip. So let's make Tony run and see how the autofocus does at 30 frames per second.
The ZF did okay here. This shot's in focus, this shot's out of focus, in focus, in focus, in focus, in focus. It kind of constantly shifts in and out of focus, falling behind. So it can't quite keep up with me, and honestly, I'm not that fast. But for kids sports or stuff shot at great distances across the field, I think it's okay.
For the first time in a Nikon camera, the ZF includes PixelShift, which increases the resolution of the file by stacking 32 images together. On the left, we have a standard image, and on the right, the PixelShift image. And yeah, the PixelShift image is much sharper. PixelShift requires a tripod, and it can't handle moving subjects like blowing leaves or moving water, so it's mostly useful in studio settings for things like fine art reproductions and commercial work. After you take your pictures, you're going to want to share them someplace, right? And nowadays, most people want to copy the pictures to their phone so they can share them on social media. Nikon has an app to do that, but it did not work well at all. In fact, it was really, really frustrating. First, I found the connections to be really flaky to my iPhone 15 Pro Max. It would connect one time and then not connect the next time, even when everything was set up correctly. The file transfers are really slow, and Nikon has tried to optimize this by default giving you only 2 megapixel still photos. Now they advertise background image transfers, which sounds like a dream, right? It should just be transferring in the background, but it doesn't allow you to shoot while it's doing that. And in my experience, it simply didn't work at all. My rant about the app isn't quite over yet. It will only auto transfer 8 megapixel files, and it advertises location tracking, which should add a GPS tag to each of your pictures and let them show up on a map. But I didn't find that worked in the real world. Again, using my iPhone, it might work better on an Android phone, but my experience is don't try to use the app. It's not worth the trouble. Instead, what I did was I used a USB-C cable between my iPhone 15 and this camera. That works really well. You can import pictures directly. It happens quickly. If you have an older iPhone though, you'll just have to get a memory card reader and do it that way.
So who is this camera for? Well, I think that if you're a huge Nikon fan, you love their retro styling, and you already own a Nikon and a bunch of full frame lenses, this would be the camera for you because it could be a second shooter. This could be your vacation camera. This could be your around town fun camera, and you can use your existing lenses to put on this camera. If it's the only camera you're going to buy, you plan on keeping one lens on it, and you want something super compact, you might consider going for a more affordable option, a fixed lens camera that's
the X100 series
like
is basically it, right?
If you can get one though.
I know, but you can't buy them. But they're less expensive, they produce better results. They're more fun to use. They're more compact.
If you're looking for one, check out our sponsor KEH. I've seen them in stock time and time again. They have the X100 series, so you can search it in their search bar. That's where I got one of mine, and that's where I sold one of mine as well. So check out our sponsor KEH. The links are right here. You can get 5% off when you use our links, and it lets KEH know we're doing a good job, so you get more long-term reviews like this. 9 months with you, like a little baby. Thanks, KEH, and thanks all of you for watching. Be sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and let us know if there's something else we should be reviewing. Thanks.
Bye. Button's not button. Don't want to get demonetized for showing too much skin.
You think you're real funny? There's been a mosquito trying to bite your head the entire time.